Taoiseach McLaughlin.
Taoiseach, you know the urgency of the situation for the families living.
I'm going to propose to take questions from the report together. In advance of consideration of the final report of the Commission of Investigation on Mother and Baby Homes by the Government, certain information relating to the report was disclosed in a newspaper report. In that context, I requested an investigation be carried out. The investigation has been undertaken by a senior official in my department and has been done in the context of a broader examination of the overall arrangements that are in place for the management of documents for government meetings and the protection of their confidentiality. That process is ongoing. What I can say is that the government is very clearly focused on making progress with the comprehensive action plan that we have set out for the survivors and former residents. As the deputies are aware, on the 13th of January 2021 last, I apologise on behalf of the Irish Government to those who spent time in a mother and baby home or a county home. Government engaged with the groups and published an action plan for survivors and former residents of mother and baby and county homes institutions on the 16th of November 2021. This plan recognises the failures of the past, acknowledging the hurt which continues to be felt by survivors and seeking to build a relationship between the trust between the state and those who have been so gravely wronged. The 22 actions set out in the action plan have been developed to respond to the broadest range of needs and wishes which survivors have expressed. Actions have been arranged into central themes which have emerged as fundamental in how the government responds: a survivor-centred approach, a formal state apology, access to personal information, enduring archive and database development, education and research, memorialisation, restorative recognition and dignified burial. Central to the development of each of these actions has been detailed and sustained engagement with survivors and their families. The establishment of the mother and baby home institutions payment schemes will provide financial payments and an enhanced medical card to defined groups in acknowledgement of suffering experienced while resident in a mother and baby home and county home institution. The state will fund the scheme, and it's estimated that it will cost approximately €800 million. Government intends to seek contributions towards the cost of the scheme from the religious congregations who were involved in operating the institutions. The legislation required to establish the scheme is currently being developed as a matter of priority, and it is intended that the scheme will open for applications as soon as possible in 2022. As the deputies know, on the 12th of January last, the government published the Birth Information and Tracing Bill 2022. It passed second stage in this House last week and has been referred to the Select Committee for detailed examination. And separately, the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth has taken possession of the archive of the Commission of Investigation and has established a dedicated information management unit to lead on the management of the Commission's archive, including applications for access to these records. A professional archivist has been appointed to work within the unit to focus on the preservation of and public access to these records. The draft Certain Institutional Burials Bill underwent pre-legislative scrutiny in the first half of 2021, and the Joint Oireachtas Committee published its report on the 15th of July. It was clear from engagement with survivors and former residents that memorialisation was considered to be a very important part of the healing process for those affected. The government also acknowledges that memorialisation plays a role in helping to remove the stigma and shame which has deeply affected so many. The commitment to a national memorial and records centre will be progressed by means of a group chaired by the Secretary-General to the Government. Funding has been secured to support this process, which will develop an overarching vision and proposed approach for the creation of the National Centre, and which will be brought to Government for approval.
A minute per question, if we're to get through it all. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
Well, a year has now passed since Minister O'Gorman wrote to the Secretary-General of the Taoiseach's Department seeking an investigation into the leaking of the Commission's final report to the media. And the failure to conclude this investigation has been described by survivors and their families as another broken promise in a long litany of broken promises from the current and former governments. So your response, Taoiseach, today in terms of the delay isn't acceptable. You gave a commitment to investigate this leak. Survivors were repeatedly told, their families and those of us who represent them here, that the process is ongoing without providing any detail of what that statement actually means. It was your decision, Taoiseach, to tag this investigation onto a broader examination of multiple cabinet leaks. But if this particular examination can't be completed in a reasonable time frame, well then it's time to separate this out from the rest of them, because this dithering and this delay is in the context of the government having to accept and acknowledge in the High Court that the Commission of Investigation treated witnesses unlawfully, and the release of a redress scheme based on findings and recommendations that have been utterly discredited. Let me repeat that, utterly discredited. So I think, Taoiseach, what's owed to the survivors and families is the following: an explanation as to why this is taking so long, clarity on what date the Secretary-General will conclude this work, and a firm commitment to publish the findings.
Thank you, Deputy Murnan O'Connor.
Taoiseach, and Taoiseach, I just have the same question, and I suppose the report into the mother and baby homes, the leak, the survivors were very upset over it, and I would like to know today, where are we at the investigation of the leak? And people want closure here, Taoiseach, so I would ask that we get that that out to people and get I think there's a huge issue with communication, Taoiseach, and I know how committed you are to this. And the other issue I want to address is, and I was glad you brought it up there, is the 22 recommendations and the redress and the medical cards. These are so important for survivors. And Taoiseach, as you know yourself, the survivors are getting older, and I think now we need to move on this as soon as possible, and I would ask that you do that. Thank you very much, Taoiseach. Thank you.
Taoiseach, this is, it's just extraordinary. I mean, an investigation was ordered as regards the leak. You tagged it on to a bigger investigation. We have no date for when the report will be done. This was so damaging to the families and the survivors. It had a huge impact. The contents were in the media days in advance. Now, let's get to the bottom of the following. Will you tell the House when this investigation is over? And if you can't find out what happened, just say that, even as bad as that will be. But these people deserve closure. If you can't find out what happened, or dare I say it, some people may not want to say what happened, that would be wrong. But at least bring some form of closure. The idea that this can just rumble on and on and on and on is just another slap in the face to the families and the survivors. So will you today at least tell us the date, once and for all, because you have the power, you are the Taoiseach, it is your department, that this will be concluded?
Thank you. Deputy McBarry.
We're 1 year on now, Taoiseach. Survivors deserve an answer as to what happened with the leaking of this information. When are they going to get it? The failure to provide answers is adding insult to injury. I mean, already the redress scheme has excluded many people from it, people who were born in the institutions, who lived there for less than 6 months. These people were profoundly affected by what happened to them. They've been cut off from the scheme. It's divisive. It's an attempt on the part of your government to play a game of divide and rule. We heard fine speeches in the Dáil last week about violence against women and what the government was going to do. This was state violence against women. Why do you force these people to go out on the streets, outside the gates of the Dáil in all weathers, to campaign for justice on this issue? They need answers, and they need answers now.
Thank you. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, the mother and baby home regime was organised abuse by church and state of mothers and children. They have been cruelly let down time and time again by the state. The Commission report was an absolute travesty. I said it from the word go, in that it failed to actually take on board the voices in a serious way and give way to the voices of the survivors. But the leak was an absolute disgrace. Government spin coming before the actual needs of the survivors, and they're right to see that report before journalists and before everybody else. And 1 year on, are you seriously not just pulling our leg when you're saying you haven't come to a conclusion as to how the leak happened, and somehow it's got tied up in some wider discussion about cabinet confidentiality? That's an absolute insult. It's an insult. So is there going to be just a cover-up of this leak? Or are we going to get a conclusion? And can you please also end the further insult of this 6-month arbitrary date for acknowledging the pain and abuse and wrong that was done to everybody who went through the mother and baby home system?
Thanks, Chairman Corley. Taoiseach, I feel like the one to point out the Emperor has no clothes here. Taoiseach, you were quoted extensively in the article which the details of the leaked report were in. You were quoted as saying that you found the report shocking and difficult to read, that you confirmed you would be making an apology to the survivors on behalf of the state and wider society. So at the very least, you had a conversation with the journalist Judy Corcoran on the Saturday. So what did you do upon finding out that the Sunday Independent had a copy of this report? Did you contact your colleagues immediately and say, we have a crisis situation, this very important report, which needs to be in the hand of survivors, has gotten into the media? What did you do about it at that stage when you knew that a leak had taken place? Did you take emergency measures to say we need to get it into the hands of survivors and that we don't have this attempt to have spin at this stage?
Thank you,
no, obviously you didn't. Can we have an external investigation into the leak as opposed to this managed process by the Taoiseach's own department that we've had that has unsurprisingly failed to find the culprit?
Taoiseach? Sorry, Deputy Pavitt.
It seems, Taoiseach, another day, another promise broken by the government. We had a specific promise by the government to investigate on a specific leak into a major report that was carried out into the experience of men and women who have been let down and treated badly by this state, treated shockingly by the state since the day that they were born, in many cases. And it's just so frustrating to see that damage being done again. But I would ask the question here, why did the specific investigation transition into a generalised investigation into leaks by the government? Who made the decision to do that? How long does it take to carry out an investigation into who leaked a document to a journalist?
All right, thank you.
How can it take a year to do that?
Well,
just one sec. It smacks of a government who are trying to dissolve the focus away from this specific group of people and this specific wrongdoing.
Right. Now, the Taoiseach is left with 2 minutes and 39 seconds to respond.
First of all, can I say that the Deputy has suggested that this is a list of broken promises. I want to make it very, very clear here that the action plan that we've outlined, we're going to follow through in every one of them, and are doing it. And people may quibble or disagree with aspects of that, but the more fundamental issues that we've committed to and that survivors wanted action on for many, many years and didn't get, in terms of access to information and tracing, for example, unfettered access. And the legislation we've produced has been groundbreaking in that respect. There's no question about that. And it went through pre-legislative assessment for about 6 months, which is good. It's now gone past second stage. And that is fulfilling a commitment that we've made in this government, but something that has been sought, I'd say, for over a decade, and the previous Oireachtas were not in a position to deliver. And secondly, in terms of the payment scheme itself, the Minister did not depend on the Commission's reports in respect of framing and establishing that payment scheme. In other words, he went beyond it. And he went beyond the recommendations of the report itself. And I think, that will come through the House, that will go into legislation. I have no doubt people are going to come forward with their amendments and their proposals. But again, the Minister will consider those at that particular stage of the bill. And the Burials Institutions Bill, I'm coming back to that, is also evidence. Now, you've said the government isn't committing. I have not interfered in the investigation. The government took that decision at the very beginning in terms of to widen it out, because in the modern era there has been a lot of leaking and so on. And in terms of the comments that I made, they were in respect of, I was asked basic questions in terms of would I be in a position to, or would I be offering an apology? It wasn't the first time I was asked that, in respect of the government's response to the publication of the report itself. And there are wider issues. I'm not responsible for what the Commission and how it did its work. I think it did extensive work and did very comprehensive work, but the Commission would have been established some years ago. The Commission investigation model is the one we have. It may not have been the optimum model for this type of investigation. We did separate ones in respect of the industrial schools and others, and lessons perhaps can be learned from that. I'm not in a position yet, but I certainly hope we can bring it to conclusion as quickly as we can.
Thank you. 5.